You'll marry him or you'll have nothing. Daisy's voice cut through the silence of our father's study like a blade. I stared at her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany desk that had once belonged to my mother. 3 months had passed since father's funeral. 3 months since I'd discovered that everything I thought I knew about my inheritance was a lie. The Wellington, fortune, my mother's legacy, now sat firmly in my stepsister's hands, thanks to a will that had been updated just weeks before father's death. This is absurd, Daisy. You can't force me into marriage. I kept my voice steady, though my hands trembled at my sides. The black morning dress felt heavy on my shoulders, a constant reminder of how quickly my world had crumbled. She smiled. The same cold smile she'd perfected during the 5 years since her mother had married my father. Can't I? The trustees have made their decision. You'll receive your inheritance only upon marriage to a suitable candidate. And Joseph Hartwell is the only man who's expressed interest. A dirt farmer with calloused hands and mud on his boots. The words escaped before I could stop them. You've orchestrated this entire thing. Joseph owns 30 acres of the most fertile land in the county. His family has farmed it for generations. Daisy stood, smoothing her emerald silk dress, a dress that cost more than most families earned in a year. Besides, what other choice do you have? Work as a governess? A seamstress? Your delicate constitution wouldn't last a week. The cruelty in her tone hit its mark. Since childhood, I'd struggled with a weak heart. Fainting spells, breathlessness, episodes that had kept me confined to the house while other girls my age attended social gatherings. Father had wrapped me in cotton wool, hiring the best doctors, ensuring I never exerted myself. The very idea of manual labour sent panic through my chest. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered. "Because you've had everything handed to you your entire life." Her mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the raw envy underneath. The Wellington name, the respect, the assumption that you are better than everyone else. Now you'll learn what it's like to live without privilege. A soft knock interrupted us. Mrs. Henderson, our housekeeper, peered around the door. "Miss Ava, Mr. Hartwell has arrived for tea." My heart lurched. Through the tall windows, I could see a man dismounting from a simple brown horse. He wore clean but patched clothes, his dark hair slightly mussed from the wind. Even from this distance, I could see the confidence in his movements, the way he straightened his shoulders before approaching the house. "Send him to the drawing room," Daisy commanded. She turned to me with satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "You have 1 hour to decide, Ava. Marriage to Joseph Hartwell or destitution. Choose wisely." The drawing room felt smaller with Joseph in it. He sat across from me, declining the delicate china teacup Mrs. Henderson offered, asking instead for water. His hands, clean but work-worn, rested calmly on his knees as he studied my face. "Miss Wellington, I want you to understand something before we proceed." His voice was deeper than I'd expected, educated despite his humble appearance. "This arrangement benefits both of us, but I won't have an unwilling wife." "Arrangement?" The word tasted bitter. "Is that what you call this forced marriage?" "Your stepsister approached me with a business proposition. You need a husband to secure your inheritance. I need..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I need connections that marriage to a Wellington would provide." "So, you're using me for my family name. And you'd be using me to access your own money." He leaned forward slightly. "At least I'm being honest about it." The directness surprised me. I'd expected either grovelling gratitude or crude opportunism. Instead, Joseph spoke like a man negotiating a partnership. "What exactly do you farm on these 30 acres?" I asked, testing him. "Corn, wheat, some vegetables for the local market. I've been experimenting with new crop rotation methods, studying agricultural journals from the university." His eyes lit up as he spoke. "There are innovations happening. fertilizers, machinery that could triple our yields. The land has potential that no one's tapping. Despite myself, I found his passion intriguing. You sound more like a scholar than a farmer. My grandfather insisted I learn to read, said knowledge was the only thing they couldn't take from poor folk. He smiled, and for a moment his entire face transformed. I may work with my hands, Miss Wellington, but I think with my head. Ever, I corrected automatically, then immediately regretted the familiarity. Ever. He repeated my name carefully, as if testing how it sounded. I won't pretend this is a love match, but I promise you'll be treated with respect. You'll have your own space, your own interests. All I ask is that you don't interfere with my work. And if I refuse, then you refuse, and I go back to my farm. He stood, brushing an invisible speck from his sleeve. But Daisy made it clear what your alternatives are. Sometimes the best choice is the one that keeps you alive to fight another day. The wisdom in those words hit me like a physical blow. This rough farmer understood strategy better than I did. Why did you really agree to this? I pressed. Joseph walked to the window, gazing out at the manicured gardens that would soon no longer be mine. Because 30 acres isn't enough to do what I want to do. The Wellington name opens doors. Your inheritance could fund improvements that would change everything, not just for me, but for every farmer in this county. You want to use my money to help others? I want to use every resource available to build something bigger than what came before. He turned back to me, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen in any of the polished gentlemen who'd courted me in the past. Ambition, real, burning ambition. The choice is yours, Eva. But understand this, if you marry me, you're not marrying a man who will be content to stay small. As he left, I remained in the drawing room, staring at the teacup he'd refused. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, matching the turmoil in my chest. Daisy appeared in the doorway, her smile triumphant. Well, have you made your decision? I thought of my mother's portrait in the hallway, her gentle eyes that had watched over my childhood. She'd married for love and found happiness. But love was a luxury I could no longer afford. I'll marry him, I said quietly. Excellent. Daisy's satisfaction was complete. The wedding is set for next month. Don't disappoint me, sister. As she swept from the room, I wondered if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life, or the smartest decision I'd ever make. The wedding dress hung in my childhood bedroom like a ghost. Daisy had chosen it, cream silk instead of white, with minimal lace and no train. Appropriate for a farmer's bride, she declared while the seamstress pinned the hem. Standing before my mirror on the morning of my wedding, I barely recognised myself. The elaborate hairstyles and jewellery of my past had been replaced by a simple bun and my mother's pearl earrings, the only items Daisy had allowed me to keep. You look beautiful, Miss Eva. Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes as she fastened the buttons along my spine. She'd been with our family since before my birth, watching helplessly as Daisy dismantled everything my mother had built. It's Mrs. Hartwell now, I reminded her, testing the name on my tongue. It felt foreign, like clothing that didn't quite fit. Joseph seems like a good man. Perhaps things won't be as difficult as you fear. Before I could respond, Daisy swept into the room wearing a gown of deep burgundy that cost more than most families' yearly income. The carriage is waiting. We mustn't keep your husband waiting. The small country church felt cavernous despite the handful of guests. Joseph's family filled one side, weathered faces I'd never seen before, women in their finest dresses that had clearly been mended multiple times. Daisy sat alone on the bride's side, a queen surveying her successful manipulation. Joseph waited at the altar in a black suit that actually fit him well. His hair was neatly combed, his boots polished to a shine. When our eyes met, he offered a small nod, not reassuring exactly, but acknowledgement that we were both fulfilling our bargain. Reverend Mills spoke about love and devotion, while I focused on the stained glass window behind the altar, depicting Christ's resurrection. Transformation. Perhaps there was hope in that symbolism. Do you, Eva Catherine Wellington, take Joseph Thomas Hartwell? The words blurred together until it was time to speak my vows. I do, I whispered, sealing my fate. Joseph's hands were warm as he slipped the simple gold band onto my finger. When he kissed me, a brief, respectful touch of lips, I caught the scent of soap and something else. Determination. The wedding breakfast at the church hall was modest but genuine. Joseph's mother, a small woman with steel in her eyes, approached me while her son spoke with other farmers. I know this isn't what you planned for your life, she said quietly, but Joseph has dreams bigger than this farm. If you can see past the dirt under his nails, you might be surprised by what he accomplishes. And if I can't, then you'll spend your life regretting what you missed. She squeezed my hand before walking away. The wagon ride to Joseph's farm, my new home, passed in tense silence. My trunk, containing everything I was allowed to keep, bounced in the back alongside farming supplies. The contrast wasn't lost on me. The farmhouse appeared as we crested a small hill. 2 stories, white clapboard siding, a wide front porch with rocking chairs. It was clean and well maintained, but the difference from Wellington Manor was stark. No marble columns, no manicured gardens, no servants waiting at attention. It's not much, Joseph said, helping me down from the wagon. But it's solid, built by my great-grandfather with his own hands. Inside, the furniture was simple but quality made. The parlour held a stone fireplace, hand-woven rugs, and shelves lined with more books than I'd expected. Agricultural journals, scientific texts, even poetry collections. I've prepared the room upstairs for you, Joseph said, carrying my trunk up narrow stairs. The door has a lock, if that makes you more comfortable. The bedroom was sparse but clean. A quilted bed, a writing desk by the window, a wardrobe that would hold my drastically reduced wardrobe with room to spare. Through the glass, I could see endless fields stretching to the horizon. I'll give you time to settle, Joseph said from the doorway. Supper's at 6. My mother taught me to cook basic meals, so you won't starve. After he left, I sank onto the bed and allowed myself 5 minutes of tears. Then, I unpacked my belongings, hanging my few remaining dresses in the oversized wardrobe. The room felt like a cell, but it was my cell now. That evening, Joseph had prepared rabbit stew and fresh bread. We ate in the kitchen rather than any formal dining room, the silence broken only by the scraping of spoons against bowls. Tell me about your plans, I finally said. Earlier, you mentioned innovations. His fork paused midway to his mouth. You really want to know? I wouldn't have asked otherwise. He set down his utensil and leaned forward. There's a new fertilizer developed at the agricultural college, nitrogen-based compounds that could double crop yields. But it's expensive, and most farmers are too conservative to risk the investment. How expensive? More than most of us see in 5 years. But if it works? His eyes lit up with that same passion I'd glimpsed during our first meeting. We could transform agriculture in this entire region, feed more people, create surplus for export, lift entire communities out of poverty. I studied his face in the lamplight. And the Wellington name would help you secure funding for these experiments. Among other things, your family has connections with railroad companies, agricultural suppliers, even politicians who control land policy. He met my gaze directly. I won't pretend I married you solely for your charming personality, Eva. But I also won't pretend this has to be a miserable arrangement. What do you propose? A partnership. You help me navigate the social and financial connections I need. I'll ensure you're comfortable and respected. Neither of us has to love the other, but we don't have to be enemies either. The practicality of his approach shouldn't have been appealing, but after a lifetime of romantic poetry and empty flattery from suitors who wanted my inheritance, Joseph's honesty was refreshing. And my inheritance? Still legally yours once the marriage is recognised, though I assume Daisy has conditions attached to its release. Monthly allowances, controlled by the trustees. She made sure I could never access the full amount at once. Joseph nodded grimly. Smart of her. Evil, but smart. Over the following weeks, I discovered the rhythm of farm life. Joseph rose before dawn, working the fields until sunset. I attempted to manage the household, though my sheltered upbringing had left me woefully unprepared for practical tasks, like cooking, cleaning, and mending. Mrs. Patterson, Joseph's elderly neighbour, took pity on my incompetence and began teaching me essential skills. City ladies learn different things, she said kindly while showing me how to preserve vegetables. But you're quick to pick up new ways. Evenings became our negotiating time. Joseph would return exhausted but animated, sharing his discoveries from agricultural journals, sketching irrigation plans, calculating crop rotations. I found myself drawn into his enthusiasm despite myself. You could write to your father's business associates, I suggested one evening as he struggled over correspondence. Mr. Thornton at the railroad company owes the Wellington family several favours. You'd do that? It benefits both of us, doesn't it? 3 months into our marriage, the first letter arrived from the agricultural college. They were interested in Joseph's proposal for experimental fertiliser trials, pending adequate funding. The second letter came from Daisy, informing me that my monthly allowance had been approved and would arrive through the local bank. That night, Joseph stood at our kitchen window, staring out at fields that would soon host revolutionary farming techniques. Thank you, he said quietly. I know this wasn't your choice. No, I admitted. But perhaps it wasn't the worst choice either. He turned to look at me, and something had shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or the beginning of genuine partnership. Outside, winter was ending, and spring planting season approached. Neither of us knew that we were about to embark on changes that would reshape not just our marriage, but our entire world. The experimental fertiliser arrived on a sweltering July morning, 18 months after our wedding. Joseph stood in the barn doorway, staring at the carefully labelled sacks as if they contained gold instead of nitrogen compounds. 60 acres committed to the trial, he murmured, wiping sweat from his forehead. If this fails, we lose everything we've invested. I handed him a glass of cold water, studying the worry lines that had deepened around his eyes. The agricultural college wouldn't have approved funding without confidence in the science. Science and farming don't always align perfectly. He drank deeply, then set the glass aside with renewed determination. But standing still guarantees failure. At least this gives us a chance. By harvest time that autumn, our experimental fields yielded 3 times the normal crop. The corn stalks towered above anything our neighbours had seen, heavy with ears that filled wagon after wagon. Joseph walked through the rows at sunset, touching the plants with something approaching reverence. We'll need to expand storage capacity, I said, watching him calculate mentally, and transportation to move this volume to market. The railroad connection you arranged will handle transport. But you're right about storage. He turned to me with that familiar gleam of ambition. What would you think about converting the old tobacco barn and building 2 new silos? With what money? The profit from this harvest should cover materials. Plus, I've been corresponding with Professor Whitman at the college. He wants to document our methods for publication in the Agricultural Quarterly. That kind of recognition could bring investors. 3 months later, Joseph's article appeared under the headline, Revolutionary Yield Increases Through Scientific Fertilization Methods, The accompanying photograph showed him standing in our transformed fields, looking every inch the successful agricultural innovator, rather than the humble farmer Daisy had dismissed. The first letter from a potential investor arrived within days. Then, a second. By spring, Joseph was meeting with businessmen from 3 different states, all eager to fund expansion of his techniques. "Mr. Hartwell, your methods could revolutionize farming across the Midwest," declared Theodore Blackwell, a railroad magnate who traveled from Chicago specifically to tour our operation. "With proper backing, you could establish demonstration farms in 5 states within 2 years." I served tea in our modest parlour while these powerful men discussed contracts worth more money than the Wellington estate had generated in a decade. Joseph negotiated with calm confidence, never revealing how desperately we'd scraped together funds just 2 years earlier. "My wife's connections in the transportation sector have been invaluable," Joseph said, nodding towards me. "Eva understands the business infrastructure necessary for large-scale agricultural distribution." It was true. While Joseph perfected farming techniques, I'd leveraged every Wellington family connection to build a network of suppliers, distributors, and transportation partners. The combination of his innovation and my social navigation was proving unstoppable. That evening, after Blackwell departed with signed partnership agreements, Joseph sat across from me at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten silent meals as virtual strangers. "We're going to be wealthy, Ava. Not comfortable, not secure, wealthy." The word hung between us, heavy with possibility. "How wealthy?" "If the expansion proceeds as planned, we'll control agricultural operations across 6 states within 5 years. The projected profits," he shook his head in amazement, "more than your family's railroad investments ever generated." A knock at our door interrupted the moment. Mrs. Patterson stood on our porch, wringing her hands nervously. "I'm sorry to disturb, but there's a fine carriage just pulled up to the Thornbury place, asking directions to your farm." Lady inside looked mighty displeased when she heard the Hartwells had done well for themselves. Through our front window, I watched an elegant black carriage navigate our now improved drive. My stomach clenched as I recognised the Wellington family crest painted on the door. "Daisy," I whispered. Joseph moved to stand beside me, his jaw tightening. "Let her come. She's not the same person who has power over you anymore." The woman who stepped from the carriage bore little resemblance to the triumphant Daisy who'd orchestrated my forced marriage. Her dress was still expensive, but I noticed the careful way she avoided muddy spots, the slight tightness around her eyes that suggested financial stress. "Eva." She swept into our parlour as if she still owned every room she entered. "You're looking rustic." I'd learned to braid my hair simply for farm work, and my dress was practical cotton rather than silk. But I stood straighter than I had in years, conscious of the strength in my hands from household labour and the sharpness in my mind from business negotiations. "Daisy, to what do we owe this unexpected pleasure?" She glanced around our parlour, taking in the comfortable furniture, the bookshelf filled with agricultural journals and business correspondence, the evidence of prosperity that hadn't existed during her last visit. "I've been hearing interesting rumours about my dear stepsister and her husband." Her smile was razor thin. "Agricultural innovations, business partnerships, substantial investments. Surely these stories are exaggerated." Joseph entered carrying a tea service, his movements unhurried despite the tension crackling through the room. "Miss Wellington, Eva didn't mention you were expected." "Mrs. Pemberton now, actually." Daisy's correction was sharp. "I married Judge Pemberton last year, a man of excellent social standing and established wealth." "Congratulations," I said, though something in her tone suggested the marriage hadn't brought the happiness she'd expected. "Yes, well, marriage to the right sort of person opens many doors." Her eyes flicked dismissively over Joseph. "Though I understand some people settle for different arrangements." Some people build empires from nothing, Joseph replied calmly, settling into his chair with complete composure. Others inherit crumbling foundations and mistake them for strength. Daisy's composure cracked slightly. I came to discuss family business, not listen to presumptions from hired help. Joseph isn't hired help, I said, ice creeping into my voice. He is my husband and my business partner. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of him. Very well. Daisy straightened, preparing to deliver what she clearly considered a killing blow. The trustees have been reviewing your marriage contract. There are irregularities in how your inheritance funds have been utilised. Questions about whether a marriage to someone so far beneath your station should qualify for full benefit distribution. What are you implying? I'm stating that your monthly allowances may need to be reconsidered, reduced perhaps, or suspended entirely pending further review. The threat that would have terrified me 3 years ago now felt almost amusing. I exchanged a glance with Joseph, seeing my own thoughts reflected in his slight smile. That would be unfortunate, I said mildly, though I suppose it would free us from the Wellington family trustees entirely. You need that money, Eva. Without it, you'll have nothing but this farm. This farm generated more profit last year than the entire Wellington Railroad division. Joseph's voice was conversational, but his words hit like hammer blows. Eva's inheritance, while appreciated, represents less than 10% of our current assets. Daisy's face went pale. That's impossible. Is it? I stood, walking to our writing desk where Joseph's business correspondence lay neatly organised. Would you like to see the contracts, the investment proposals, the expansion plans that will make us the largest agricultural operation in the Midwest? For the first time since childhood, I watched my stepsister struggle for words. The power dynamic she'd spent years carefully constructing was crumbling before her eyes. I don't believe it, she whispered. Believe it, Joseph said, rising to stand beside me. Your stepsister has proven to be an exceptional businesswoman. Perhaps forcing her into this marriage was the greatest favour you could have done her. Daisy stared at us. Eva and Joseph Hartwell, partners in every sense that mattered, and I saw the exact moment she realised the magnitude of her miscalculation. You're lying. Daisy's voice cracked like thin ice. The Hartwells are farmers, dirt farmers with calloused hands and revolutionary agricultural methods that just secured a $500,000 federal contract, I interrupted, sliding a government document across the table. Joseph will be supplying grain to military installations across 7 states. Daisy's hands trembled as she read the official seal. The staggering figures, the signature that made it all real. The monthly allowance she'd used to control me for 3 years suddenly seemed laughably small. How? She whispered. Joseph leaned back in his chair with the confidence of a man who'd earned his place at any table. While you were busy playing society games, Ava and I were building something real. She understood that connections without substance crumble, but innovation with the right partnerships becomes unstoppable. Judge Pemberton said the Wellington investments were solid, Daisy said desperately. The railroad stocks, the manufacturing shares, were managed by men who prioritised tradition over progress, I finished. While you were maintaining status, we were creating wealth. Through our parlour window, I could see the evidence of our success. New silos gleamed in the afternoon sun, mechanised equipment that had revolutionised farming efficiency, and survey stakes marking land purchases that had quadrupled our property size in 18 months. The judge has been having financial difficulties, hasn't he? Joseph asked quietly. Railroad investments have been declining since the new shipping routes opened through the southern states. Daisy's face went white. How could you possibly know that? Because we're investors in those new shipping companies. I stood, walking to our window with the composure of a woman who finally controlled her own destiny. Your husband's outdated portfolio was mentioned in several business meetings. Investors were advised to avoid similar positions. The Wellington trustees assured me your allowances could be suspended at any time, Daisy said, but desperation was creeping into her voice. The trustees serve the Wellington estate interests, Joseph replied, and I've recently made an offer to purchase the remaining family holdings. Railways, manufacturing concerns, even the manor house itself. That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. I returned to my chair, meeting my stepsister's eyes directly. We have 12 times that kind of money, and more coming in every quarter as our methods spread across the country. The clock on our mantel chimed 4 times, marking another hour of the life Daisy had never imagined for me. She sat rigid in her chair, trying to process how completely her calculations had failed. "Why would you want the old properties?" she asked finally. "They're nothing but reminders of the past." "Because they represent something I intend to transform," I said. "Joseph's agricultural innovations need administrative headquarters, research facilities, distribution centres. The Wellington Manor will become the centre of the largest farming cooperative in American history. And because," Joseph added with a slight smile, "it seems fitting that the woman who forced Ava into this marriage should witness exactly what she helped create." Daisy's composure finally shattered. "I gave you everything you have. Without me, you'd still be playing parlour games and reading poetry. Without you, I might have married some soft gentleman who would have kept me as a pampered decoration." I felt no anger now, only clarity. "Instead, you gave me a partner who saw my intelligence as an asset rather than an ornament." Joseph reached across the table to take my hand. Not a romantic gesture, but acknowledgement between equals. "We make a formidable team." "This isn't over," Daisy said, standing abruptly. "Judge Pemberton has connections in Washington. Legal challenges can be mounted, contracts can be questioned. Oh, Judge Pemberton owes considerable debts to 3 banks that now consider Joseph and me preferred investors," I said calmly. "His connections depend on financial stability he no longer possesses." "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" Daisy's voice was bitter with the taste of defeat. "We've planned carefully. The difference between us, Daisy, is that you schemed to tear down what others built. We schemed to create something entirely new." After Daisy left, her carriage disappearing down our drive like a retreating army, Joseph and I sat in companionable silence. The woman who tried to destroy me had inadvertently given me the greatest gift imaginable, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared ambition. "Do you regret it?" Joseph asked eventually. "The life you might have had?" I considered the question seriously. The Eva Wellington who'd once fainted at social gatherings and needed smelling salts for minor stress would never have survived what we'd built together. That sheltered girl had died the day I said "I do" in a country church, and someone infinitely stronger had taken her place. "Never," I said, and meant it completely. 6 months later, the local newspaper ran a front-page story about the grand reopening of Wellington Manor as the headquarters of Hartwell Agricultural Enterprises. The photograph showed Joseph and me cutting the ribbon, while Governor Whitfield applauded our contribution to the state's economic development. Daisy stood in the crowd, wearing a dress that had clearly been altered to appear more expensive than it was. Judge Pemberton beside her looked uncomfortable in a suit that had seen better days. When our eyes met across the gathering, I saw something I'd never expected to see in my stepsister's face. Respect. That evening, as Joseph and I walked through fields that stretched beyond the horizon, I marvelled at the path that had brought us here. What began as a forced marriage to a poor farmer had become the foundation of an empire that was reshaping American agriculture. "Mrs. Patterson was right, you know," Joseph said, watching the sunset paint our crops gold. The first day we met, she told me I was marrying above my station. Were you? Absolutely. I married a woman with the vision to see past a dirt farmer's rough hands to the empire those hands could build. He smiled, the same expression that had surprised me on our wedding day. Best bargain I ever made. As we turned toward home, our home built with our sweat and our dreams, I thought about the girl who'd once sat trapped in a mahogany-panelled study, listening to Daisy dictate the terms of her future. That girl could never have imagined she was about to embark on the greatest adventure of her life. Some prisons, it turned out, were actually doorways in disguise.